Hi, it's Anna from Anna and Tanya's reading of Terry Pratchett's The Night Watch. We're back at it after life getting away for a few days. We'll do our best to get caught up. It may be a bit noisy in the background because it's the May long weekend and firecrackers are going off nearby. Vimes tried not to run back to the watch house because too many people were standing around in nervous groups and even a running uniform could be risky. Besides, you didn't run for officers. He was a sergeant. Sergeants walked with a measured tread. To his mild surprise, the men were still out in the yard. Someone had even hung up the swordsmanship targets, which would certainly be helpful if the watchmen were faced with an enemy who was armless and tied to a pole. He climbed the stairs. The captain's door was open, and he saw that the new man had repositioned his desk so that he could see out onto the landing and down the stairs. Not a good sign. Not a good sign at all. An officer shouldn't see what was going on. He should rely on his sergeants to tell him what was going on. That way things ran smoothly. This man was keen. Oh dear. The new captain looked up. Oh, good grief, Vimes thought. It's bloody Rust this time round. And indeed it was, the Honourable Ronald Rust, the god's gift to the enemy, any enemy, and a walking encouragement to desertion. The Rust family had produced great soldiers by the undemanding standards of deduct your own casualties from those of the enemy, and if the answer is a positive number, it was a glorious victory school of applied warfare. But Rust's lack of any kind of military grasp was matched only by his high opinion of the talent he in fact possessed only in negative amounts. It hadn't been Rust last time. He vaguely remembered some other dim captain. All these little changes, what would they add up to? I bet he's only just been made a captain, thought Vimes. Just think of the lives I could save by accidentally cutting his head off now. Look at the blue eyes, look at that stupid curly mustache. And he's only going to get worse. Are you Keel? The voice was a bark. Yes, sir. I sent orders for you to come up here an hour ago, man. Yes, sir, but I've been on duty all night and morning, and there's been rather a lot to attend to. I expect an order to be obeyed promptly, Sergeant. Yes, sir. So do I, sir. That's why discipline starts at the top, Sergeant. The men obey you, you obey me, I obey my superiors. Glad to hear it, sir. Rust had the same firm grip of common politeness, too. What is all that going on in the yard? Vimes steered according to the prevailing wind. Bit of morale building, sir, instilling a bit of esprit de corps. And hit a reef. Ruff raised his eyebrows. Why, he said, the men's job is to do what they are told, as is yours. A group hug is not part of the arrangement, is it? A bit of camaraderie helps the job along, sir, in my experience. Are you eyeballing me, Keel? No, sir. I'm wearing an expression of honest doubt, sir. Eyeballing is 4 steps up, sir, right after looking at you in a funny way. By standard military custom and practice, sir, sergeants are allowed to go all the way up to an expression of acute... What's that pip over your stripes, man? I mean sergeant at arms, sir. They were a special kind of copper. I also have cider. It's a good night. The captain grunted and glanced at the papers in front of him. Lord Winder has received an extraordinary request that you be promoted to lieutenant, Sergeant. It has come from Captain Swing of the Particulars, and his lordship listens to Captain Swing. Oh, and he wants you to be transferred to the Particulars. Personally, I think the man is mad. I'm 100% behind you there, sir. You do not wish to be a lieutenant? No, sir. Too long for Dick and too short for Richard, sir, said Vimes, focusing on a point a few inches above Rust's head. What? Neither one thing nor t'other, sir. Oh, so you'd like to be a captain, eh? Said Rust, grinning evilly. No, sir. Don't want to be an officer, sir. Get confused when I see more than one knife and fork on the table, sir. You certainly don't look like officer material to me, Sergeant. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Good old Rust. Good young Rust. The same unthinking rudeness masquerading as blunt speaking, the same stiff-neckedness, the same petty malice. Any sergeant worth his salt would see how to make use of that. Wouldn't mind transferring to the Particulars, though, sir, he volunteered. It was a bit of a gamble, but not much. Rust's mind was reliable. I expect you would like that, Keel, said Rust. No doubt you ran rings around that old fool Tilden, and don't fancy the idea of a captain with his finger on the pulse, eh? No, you can damn well stay here, understand? Wonderful, thought Vimes. Sometimes it's like watching a wasp land on a stinging nettle. Someone's going to get stung and you don't care. Yes, sir, he said, eyes still staring straight ahead. Have you shaved today, man? Excused shaving, sir, Vimes lied. Doctor's orders. Been sewed up on a face, sir. Could shave one half, sir. He remained at eye front while Rust grudgingly stared at him. The cut was still pretty livid, and Vimes hadn't dared look under the patch yet. "Hit yourself in the face with your own bell, did you?" grunted the captain. Vimes's fingers twitched. "Very funny, sir," he said. "Now go and get the men fell in, Keel. Look sharp. I shall inspect them in a moment. And tell that idiot with the flat nose to clear the stable." "Sir?" "My horse will be arriving shortly. I don't want to see that disgusting screw in there." "What? Turn Marilyn out, sir?" said Vimes, genuinely shocked. "That was an order. Tell him to jump to it." "What do you want us to do with her, sir?" "I don't care. You are a sergeant. You've had an order. Presumably there are knackermen. People here around here must eat something, no doubt." Vimes hesitated a moment. Then he saluted. "Right you are, sir." "Do you know what I saw on the way here, Sergeant?" "Couldn't say, sir," said Vimes, staring straight ahead. "People were building barricades, Sergeant." "Sir?" "I know you heard me, man." "Well, it's to be expected, sir. It's happened before. People get jumpy. They hear rumors of mobs and out-of-control soldiers. They try to protect their street. It is a flagrant challenge to government authority. People can't take the law into their own hands." "Well, yes, but these things generally run their course." "My gods, man, how did you manage to get promoted?" Vimes knew he should leave it at that. Rust was a fool, but at the moment he was a young fool, which is more easily excused. Maybe it was just possible, if caught early enough, that he could be upgraded to idiot. "Sometimes it pays to—" he began. "Last night every watch house in this city was mobbed," said Rust, ignoring him, "except this one. How do you account for that?" His mustache bristled. Not being attacked was a definite proof of Vimes's lack of moral fiber. "It was just a case of—" "Apparently a man attempted an assault on you. Where is he now?" "I don't know, sir. We bandaged him up and took him home." "You let him go?" "Yes, sir. He was—" But Rust was always a man to interrupt in an answer with a demand for the answer he was in fact interrupting. "Why?" "Sir, because at the time I thought it prudent to—" "3 watchmen were killed last night. Did you know that? There were gangs roaming the streets. Well, martial law has been declared. Today we're going to show them a firm hand. Get your men together. Now." Vimes saluted, turned about, and walked slowly down the stairs. He wouldn't have run for a big clock. A firm hand. Right. Gangs roaming the streets. Well, we sure as hell never did anything We sure as hell never did anything when they were criminal gangs. And when you've got madmen and idiots on either side and everything hangs in the balance, well, trouble is always easy to find when you have enough people looking for it. One of the hardest lessons of young Sam's life had been finding out that people in charge weren't in charge. It had been finding out that governments were not, on the whole, staffed by people who had a grip, and that plans were what people made instead of thinking. Most of the watchmen were clustered around the stairs. Snouty was quite good at internal communications of the worrying kind. Tidy yourselves, lads," said Vimes. "Captain will be down in a few minutes. Apparently it's time for a show of strength." "What strength?" asked Billy Wiglet. "Ah, Billy, what happens is, the vicious revolutionaries take one look at us and scuttle back off to their holes," said Vimes. He was immediately sorry he'd said that. Billy hadn't learned irony. "I mean, we just give the uniforms an airing," he translated. "We'll get cheesed," said Fred Cullen. "Not if we stick together," said Sam. "Right," said Vimes. "After all, we're heavily armed men going on patrol among civilians who are, by law, unarmed. If we're careful, we shouldn't get hurt too badly." Another bad move. Dark sarcasm ought to be taught in schools, he thought. Besides, armed men could get into trouble if the unarmed civilians were angry enough, especially if there were cobblestones on the streets. He heard the distant clock strike 3. Tonight the streets would explode. According to the history books, it would be one shot that did it, round about sunset. One of the foot regiments would be assembled in Hen and Chicken's Field awaiting orders. And there would be people watching them. Troops always drew an audience, impressionable kids, the inevitable Ankh-Morpork floating street crowd, and of course the ladies whose affection was extremely negotiable. The crowd shouldn't have been there, people said afterwards. But where would they have been? The field was a popular spot. It was the only vaguely green space in that part of the city. People played games there, and, of course, there was always the progress of the corpse on the gibbet to inspect. And the men were troops, ordinary foot soldiers, people's sons and husbands, taking a bit of rest and having a drink. All right. Oh, that was right. Afterwards, it was said that the troops were drunk, and that they shouldn't have been there. Yep, that was the reason, Vimes reflected. No one should have been there. But they were there, and when that captain got narrow in his stomach and was groaning on the ground, some of the crossbowmen fired in direction of the shot. That's what the history book said. They fired at the house windows where people had been watching. Perhaps the shot had come from one of them. Some arrows fell short, some did not, and there were people who fired back. And then, one after another, horrible things would happen. By then it was too late for them not to. The tension would unwind like a huge spring scything through the city. There were plotters, there was no doubt about it. Some had been ordinary people who'd had enough. Some were young people with no money who objected to the fact that the world was run by old people who were rich. Some were in it to get girls. Some had been idiots as mad as swing, with a view of the world just as rigid and unreal, who were on the side of what they called the people. Vimes had spent his life on the streets and had met decent men and fools and people who'd steal a penny from a blind beggar and people who performed silent miracles or desperate crimes every day behind the grubby windows of little houses, but he'd never met the people. People on the side of the people always ended up disappointed in any case. They found out that the people tended not to be very grateful or appreciative or forward-thinking or obedient. The people tended to be small-minded and conservative and not very clever and were even distrustful of cleverness. And so the children of the Revolution were faced with the age-old problem. It wasn't that you had the wrong kind of government, which was obvious. It was that you had the wrong kind of people. As soon as you saw people as things to be measured, they didn't measure up. What would run through the streets soon enough wouldn't be a revolution or a riot. It'd be people who were frightened and panicking. It was what happened when the machinery of city life faltered, the wheels stopped running, and all the little rules broke down. And when that happened, humans were worse than sheep. Sheep just ran. They didn't try to bite the sheep next to them. By sunset, a uniform would automatically be a target. Then it wouldn't matter where a watchman's sympathies lay. He'd be just another man in armor. "What?" he said, snapping back to the present. "You all right, Sarge?" said Corporal Colin. Said Vimes as the real world returned. "You were well away," said Fred, "staring at nothing. You ought to have a proper sleep last night, Sarge." "There's plenty of time to sleep in the grave," said Vimes, looking at the ranks of the watch. "Yeah, I heard that, Sarge, but no one wakes you up with a cup of tea. I got 'em lined up, Sarge." Fred had made an effort, Vimes could see. So had the men themselves. He'd never seen them looking quite so formal. Usually they had a helmet and a breastplate apiece. Beyond that, equipment was varied and optional. But today, at least, they looked neat. Shame about the heights. No man could easily inspect a row that included Wiglet at one end and Nancy Ball at the other. Wiglet was so short he'd once been accused of nailing a sergeant, being far too short to eyeball anyone, while Nancy Ball was always the first man on duty to know when it was raining. He'd have to stand well back to get both of them into vision without eye strain. "Well done, lads," he managed, and heard Rust coming down the stairs. It must have been the first time the man had seen his new command in full. In the circumstances, he bore up quite well. He merely sighed. He turned to Vimes and said, "I require something to stand on." Vimes looked blank. "Sir?" "I wish to address the men in order to inspire them and stiffen their resolve. They must understand the political background to the current crisis." "Oh, we all know about Lord Winder being a loony, sir," said Wiglet cheerfully. Frost nearly formed on Rust's forehead. Vimes drew himself up. "Squad dismiss!" he shouted, and then leaned towards Rust as the men scuttled away. "A quiet word, sir." "Did that man really say—" Rust began. "Yes, sir. These are simple men, sir," said Vimes, thinking quickly. "Best not to disturb them, if you take my meaning." Rust inserted this into his range of options. Vimes could see him thinking. It was a way out, and it suited his opinion of the watch in general. It meant that he hadn't been cheeked by a constable, he'd merely dealt with a simpleton. "They know their duty, sir," Vimes added for reinforcement. "Their duty, Sergeant, is to do what they are told." "Exactly, sir." Rust stroked his mustache. "There is something in what you say, Sergeant, and you trust them?" "As a matter of fact, yes, sir." We will make a circuit of the surrounding streets in 10 minutes. This is a time for action. Reports are disturbing. We must hold the line, Sergeant." And he believes it, thought Vimes. He really does. Cheers. The watchmen marched out into the afternoon sunshine, and did so badly. They were not used to marching. Their normal method of progress was the stroll, which was not a recognized military maneuver, or the frantic withdrawal, which is. In addition, the convection currents of prudent cowardice were operating in the ranks. There was a definite sideways component to each man's progress as he sought to be in the middle. The watchmen had shields, but they were light wicker-work things intended to turn blows and deflect stones. They wouldn't stand up to anything with an edge. The advance, therefore, was by means of a slowly elongating huddle. Rust didn't notice. He had a gift for not seeing things he did not want to see and not hearing things he did not want to hear. but he could not ignore a barricade. Ankh-Morpork wasn't really a city, not when the chips were down. Places like Dolly Sisters and Knapp Hill and Seven Sleepers had been villages once, before they were absorbed by the urban sprawl. On some level, they still held themselves separate. As for the rest, well, once you got off the main streets, it was all down to neighborhoods. People don't move around much. When tension was high, you relied on your mates and your family. Whatever was going down, you tried to make sure it wasn't going down your street. It wasn't revolution, it was quite the reverse. It was defending your doorstep. They were building a barricade in Whalebone Lane. It wasn't a particularly good one, being mostly made up of overturned market stalls, a small cart, and quite a lot of household furniture, but it was a symbol. Rust's mustache bristled. Right in our faces, he snapped. Absolute defiance of constituted authority, Sergeant. Do your duty. And what would that be at this point, sir? Said Vimes. Arrest the ringleaders, and your men will pull the barricade down. Vimes sighed. Very well, sir. If you will stand back, I shall seek him out. He walked up to the domestic clutter, aware of eyes watching him from before and behind. When he was a few feet away, he cupped his hands. All right, what's going on here? He shouted. He was aware of whispering, and he was ready for what happened next. When the stone flew over the top of the furniture, he caught it in both hands. I asked a civil question, he said. Come on! There was more whispering. He distinctly heard, That's the sergeant from last night, and some sort of sotto-voce argument. Then a voice shouted, Death to the fascist oppressors! This time the argument was more frantic. He heard someone say, Oh, all right. And then, Death to the fascist oppressors, present company accepted. There, is everyone happy now? He knew that voice. Mr. Reginald Shue, is it? I regret that I only have one life to lay down for Whalebone Lane, the voice shouted, somewhere behind the wardrobe. If only you knew, Vimes thought. I don't think that will be necessary, he said. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Is this any way to behave? You can't take the law into your own hands. His voice faltered. Sometimes it takes the brain a little while to catch up to the mouth. Vimes turned and looked at the squad, who'd needed no prompting to all hang back. Then he turned to look at the barricade. Where exactly was the law, right now? What did he think he was doing? The job, of course, the one that's in front of you. He'd always done it, and the law had always been out there, but somewhere close. He'd always been pretty sure where it was, and it definitely had something to do with the badge. The badge was important. Yes, it was shield-shaped. For protection. He'd thought about that in the long nights in the darkness. It protected him from the beast, because the beast was waiting in the darkness of his head. He'd killed werewolves with his bare hands. He'd been mad with terror at the time, but the beast had been there inside, giving him strength. Who knew what evil lurked in the hearts of men? A copper, that's who. After 10 years you thought you'd seen it all, but the shadows always dished up more. You saw how close men lived to the beast. You realized that people like Carcer were not mad. They were incredibly sane. They were simply men without a shield. They'd looked at the world and realized all their rules didn't have to apply to them, not if they didn't want them to. They weren't fooled by all the little stories. They shook hands with the beast. But he, Sam Vimes, had stuck by the badge, except for that time when even that hadn't been enough, and he'd stuck by the bottle instead. He felt as if he'd stuck by the bottle now. The world was spinning. Where was the law? There was the barricade. Who was it? Who was it protecting from what? The city was run by a madman and his shadowy chums, so where was the law? Coppers like to say that people shouldn't take the law into their own hands, and they thought they knew what that meant. They were thinking about the normal times and men who went round to sort out a neighbor with a club because his dog had crapped once too often on their doorstep. But at times like this, who did the law belong to? It shouldn't be in the hands of people. If it shouldn't be in the hands of people, where the hell should it be? People who knew better? Then you've got Winder and his pals, and how good was that? What was supposed to happen next? Oh yes, he had a badge, but it wasn't his, not really. And he'd got orders, and they were the wrong ones. And he'd got enemies for all the wrong reasons. And maybe there was no future. It didn't exist anymore. There was nothing real, no solid point on which to stand, just Sam Vimes where he had no right to be. It was as if his body, trying to devote as many resources as possible to untangling the spinning thoughts, was drawing those resources from the rest of Vimes. His vision darkened, his knees were weak. There was nothing but bewildered despair, and a lot of explosions. Havelock Veterinary knocked politely on the window of the little office just inside the Assassin's Guild main gate. The duty-on porter raised the hatch. Signing out, Mr. Maroon, said the assassin. Yes, sir, said Maroon, pushing a big ledger toward him. And where are we off to today, sir? General reconnoitering, Mr. Maroon. Just generally looking around. Ah, I said to Mrs. Maroon last night, sir, that you were a great one for looking round, said Maroon. We look and we learn, Mr. Maroon. We look and we learn, said Veterinary, signing his name in the book and putting the pen back in its holder. And how was your little boy? Thank you for asking, sir. He's a lot better, said the porter. Glad to hear it. Oh, I see the Honourable John Bleedwell is out on a commission. To the palace? Now, sir, said Maroon, grinning and waving a finger. You know I couldn't tell you that, sir, even if I knew. Of course not. The veterinary glanced at the back wall of the office, where in an old brass rack were a number of envelopes. The word active was inscribed on the top rack. Good afternoon, Mr. Maroon. Afternoon, sir. Good, looking around. He watched the young man walk out into the street. Then Maroon went into the cubbyhole next to the office to put the kettle on. He rather liked young Veterinary, who was quiet and studious, and, it had to be said, a generous young man on appropriate occasions, but a bit weird all the same. Once Maroon had watched him in the foyer standing still. That was all he was doing. He wasn't making any attempt to conceal himself. After half an hour, Maroon had wandered over and said, Can I help you, sir? And Veterinary had said, Thank you no, Mr. Maroon. I'm just teaching myself to stand still. To which there wasn't really any sensible comment that could be made. And the young man must have left after a while, because Maroon didn't remember seeing him again that day. He heard a creak from the office and poked his head round the door. There was no one there. As he made the tea, he thought he heard a rustle from the next door and went to check. It was completely empty. Remarkably so, he thought later on. It was almost as if it was even more empty than it would be if there was just, well, no one in it. He went back to his comfy chair in the cubbyhole and relaxed. In the brass rack, the envelope marked Bleedwell J slid back slightly. Okay, and I'm done for tonight, and tomorrow Tanya will be reading you one of my favorite bits, which I suppose I could say about any part worth reading, actually, but it is a really good bit. So, have a good night, guys. Bye.